Hello, I'm osukarui and I mostly speedrun obscure N64 games. These games generally don't have a lot of speedrunning documentation, so in this series I want to document my personal experience when speedrunning these games. I'll therefore cover the history of the game as a speed game, talk about speed strats, interesting movement tech, and glitches, along with the world record progression for the game. I hope you enjoy. Okay, so the last game we covered was Shadow Man, and now it's time for the next game I speedran. Toy Story 2 Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue. Toy Story 2 is, like many of the games of that era, a third-person 3D platformer collectathon, where you play as Buzz Lightyear trying to rescue Woody, loosely following the events of the movie, completing various tasks along the way. My story with this game starts when, during Christmas 2020, my wife went abroad and I was home alone for a few weeks, so I decided to use the opportunity to learn a new speed game. I wanted to do something similar to a 12-hour challenge, but slightly longer. Basically, I wanted to learn a speedrun in a few days and not put too much effort into it. This game was my first attempt at speedrunning a game which isn't all that obscure and already has an established meta that runners use. All the games which I had run before this had very few runners, and for those games my objective was to help pave the path that the speedrun would take. Toy Story's path, on the other hand, had already been paved by other people, and I would assume the role of a student, simply learning what others had already discovered. So, before I talk about my own ventures into the game, let's rewind a bit and review these already paved paths by looking at a few world records and the strats used in those runs. But actually, before we do that, I have one very important disclaimer. Toy Story 2 has a few different platforms: PC, PlayStation, Dreamcast, and N64. But the N64 leaderboards are split into emulator and console. Out of all of these leaderboards, the N64 emulator is the most popular, with more than 40 runners. N64 console, on the other hand, only has 10 runners currently, so the richest part of this game's speedrunning history can probably be found within the emulator leaderboards, rather than on console. However, I chose to run on console, since that feels more authentic to me. So, in this video, I will only be talking about the history of the console version. And all of the world records and strats mentioned in this video will be from the console leaderboards. So just know that this game has a much broader and richer history on the emulator leaderboard compared to the one that I am about to present. With that out of the way, let's proceed. To the best of my knowledge, the first world record was a 1 hour, 6 minute and 31 second time by Spark. I'm not sure when this was set, since I can only see it as a PB on his splits on his first uploaded run. Now, that first uploaded run was a 58:59 set on the 19th of July 2013. He would then set 3 more world records, a 54:47, a 50:04, and then finally a 49:39 on the 26th of July 2013. His goal was, to the best of my knowledge, only to get a sub 50-minute time. Let's talk a little bit about what exactly he needed to do to finish the game. The game has 5 worlds, or zones to be exact. And each of these worlds has 2 main levels, which are big open sandbox collectathon levels, before moving on to a single boss level. The game therefore consists of 10 main levels and 5 boss levels. Now, within each main level there are 5 Pizza Planet tokens to collect, which you use to unlock other levels. So there is a total of 50 tokens in the game, and in order to finish the game you need to collect at least 30 of these tokens. Also, to proceed to the next level you must have collected at least one token from the previous level. So every level must be played to some extent. The 5 tokens found in each level are always set up the same. You get 1 token for collecting 50 coins scattered throughout the level, 1 for defeating the mini-boss in the level, 1 token for finding 5 collectibles, 1 token for finishing a race or a timed obstacle, and lastly 1 token for finishing some sort of puzzle. Now, Spark's gameplay was mostly just playing the game normally as fast as he could. But there was one skip he used in the first level of the game to avoid having to do the full race in the level. Normally you would need to race 3 circles around this car, but what you can do instead is climb on top of the car, and since there are no checkpoints you can just jump through the finish line and back onto the car. As long as you go through the finish line in the correct direction, the game then thinks you finished a full lap. So if you do this 3 times, you will finish the race in just a few seconds. The next world record holder in this category, Jaguar 002, would emerge around 3 years later and would set 3 world records. First a 49.29, then a 42.50, and lastly a 41.40 on the 12th of November 2016. Now at this point, people had been running the emulated version for some time, and a proper route and movement meta had been established. Jaguar's route resembles the one used by players today much more than it resembles Spark's runs. The movement, however, still had a long way to go. There was one very important speed mechanic that Jaguar implemented to a much higher degree than Spark, and that was the extended double jump. The extended double jump is probably the most important speed mechanic in the whole game, and it's the first thing that every new runner needs to get a feel for. When Buzz jumps, he can do one more jump in the air before he lands. That is, he has a double jump. Now, when you perform that second jump will greatly impact how far you can jump. This trick doesn't have a lot of research put into it, so in preparation for this video, I decided to use task tools to see the differences depending on which frame you jump. Let's look at this graph showing the trajectory of Buzz's jumps. Quick disclaimer though, this graph is not very accurate and only serves as a way to demonstrate roughly how these jumps behave. The first line you see here is the trajectory of his initial jump. Now, if Buzz jumps 10 frames after his initial jump, his second jump trajectory will look something like this. If Buzz jumps 1 frame later on his second jump, you can see his trajectory will look something like this. And then if he then jumps another frame later, it looks like this. And you can see that on each of these jumps, his distance gets slightly longer. Another thing to note is that on all of these jumps, the top height of the second jump is always the same, no matter the height the second jump started from. The more we delay the second jump, the farther we go. And we can continue that trend until we reach frame 23 after the initial jump, where the perfect extended double jump is achieved, the max distance. If, however, we jump 1 frame later on frame 24, something completely different happens, and Buzz will not reach the same height as all of the other frames. In fact, on frame 24, Buzz just gets a tiny measly flap of a double jump, gaining much less distance and height. And on every frame after that, the extended double jump cannot be achieved. To summarize, the closer you go to frame 23, the more distance you gain. but it's risky because if you go past frame 23, you lose all that distance. It's also hard to say what exactly constitutes an extended double jump, since the trick has a very clear-cut endpoint, or frame 23, but where it starts is more difficult to say. Now, there are many places in the game that require an extended double jump to be able to reach across a gap. But depending on the size of the gap, the amount of frames you have to work with differs, so some jumps are very lenient, while others might only have a 1-frame window to reach across. Another disclaimer about this trick is that there might very well be slight variations between the height gained depending on when the second jump is timed, so the graph might look a bit more like this. But I'm not sure about that, and to find that out would require having height coordinates visible while passing the trick, which I was not able to do. Now, Jaguar would also add a new way to kill the boss in the second level in the game, Andy's Neighborhood. Normally, the boss is invulnerable to shots during certain parts of his attack cycle, so you need to shoot him during specific windows when he becomes vulnerable. However, if you go to the edge of these trees, the game thinks you have left the boss arena and the boss's invulnerability goes away, so you can just spam him with shots to kill him very quickly. The next champion to enter the scene was a runner called Capri Dog. He would start by setting 2 world records, a 36:51 and then a 33:55 on the 17th of October 2017. He didn't really implement anything new, but instead he just refined the movement and made fewer mistakes. Then, around half a year later, a runner called XYX would claim the record with a 33:43 on the 5th of March 2018. But Capri Dog would reclaim the world record and get 3 more records in 2018, a 32:22, a 32:04, and finally a 31:10 on the 27th of December 2018. None of these records really added anything major into the run, but the movement and the quality of the speedruns just kept getting better. This game is very movement heavy, so there always seems to be potential to do things just a tiny bit faster. Now, this last record was the world record when I decided to run the game, and I won't bore you with the details, but during my few days of running, I ended up with a time of 42:01. I contemplated going for a sub 40 run, but ultimately I didn't do that. Now, back to the world records. Things stayed pretty stagnant for around 3 years, but in August 2021, things really started heating up again. Capri Dog would come back and set 4 world records, a 31:08, a 30:19, then a 29:49, which, despite being the first run to go under the half-an-hour barrier, does not have any video evidence, but can only be seen on his splits in his next PB. He would then get a 29:34 on the 21st of September. But before we move on, let's stop here to look at what new strats had been conjured in the last 3 years to help him take the run so low. At this point, the route had actually changed somewhat significantly, since a new trick had been discovered: text storage. Now, this glitch is somewhat intricate, so there's a lot to talk about here. As mentioned before, each level has 5 tokens, and while some of these tokens are always there, others require Buzz to do something in order to spawn the token. So let's start by going through the normal process when a token appears. Now, I will be showing a timeline for how this plays out on the top part of the screen. The green areas and the green outline around Buzz will represent when the player has control over Buzz, and the red will represent when the player does not have control over Buzz. Let's use defeating a boss as our example. After defeating the boss, a few frames later, the camera will swing from Buzz toward the token spawning location. When this happens, the player will lose control over bus as soon as the camera starts moving. After the camera has moved to the right location, the token spawning animation starts, and after the animation is finished, the camera will swing back to bus. When that happens, you regain control over bus. You can then move toward the token to collect it. Generally, the tokens are in the air, so you have to jump to collect them. As soon as you touch the token, you will lose control over bus again, and bus will fall to the ground. As soon as bus hits the ground, a text box will appear asking the player if they want to continue playing or exit the level. It's important to note that the game will only spawn the text box once 3 requirements are met. Bus has to have collected the token, bus has to have hit the ground, and bus has to be stationary. But the game makes sure you are stationary by taking control from the player. As a side note, the most optimal way to collect these spawning tokens is to make sure bus is in the same place as the token spawns. This will skip the token spawning animation entirely, and you can go straight to the text box section. However, to get text storage, we actually need the token spawning animation, so we will do things a bit differently. First though, we need to talk about the super spin attack. Normally, by pressing C down, you can do a short spin attack, but by holding C down and then releasing it after the spin meter is full, you will do a super spin attack. The super spin attack lets bus spin for a few seconds, but when the attack ends, bus will get dizzy and you will lose control over him for a few frames before regaining control. And it's precisely this losing and gaining control mechanic which we can exploit to get text storage. Let's go through the sequence for the token spawning as we did before, but this time we are going to make sure the last hit we do on the boss is a super spin attack. I will show this timeline at the bottom of the screen so you can compare it to the normal token spawning on the top of the screen. So, the first thing we do is drain most of the boss's health before finishing him off with a super spin attack. After the boss is defeated, the super spin attack will continue its course. After we defeat the boss, the camera moves from bus to the token spawning spot. And remember, when this happens, we lose control of bus. After that, the token spawning animation starts. But at just about the same time, the super spin attack ends and bus gets dizzy. After bus stops being dizzy, we gain control over bus, even though the token spawning animation is going on, which normally should not be the case. However, if we were to jump into the token right away, the token grabbing would take control from bus again and we would land on the ground and the text box would appear normally. Instead, what we need to do is wait until the token animation has ended and jump right as the camera swings toward bus again. This way, when we jump and grab the token, we lose control of bus for a few frames, but remember, when the camera finishes swinging back to bus, you gain control again. So, as long as that happens while you are still in the air, you gain control before he ever lands. And remember, there are 3 requirements for the text box to spawn. We need to have collected the token, we need to have landed on the ground, and we need to be stationary. By regaining control over bus while he is still in the air, we can be moving when we land on the ground. So one of these requirements is not met because we are not stationary, thus delaying the text box spawning. So as long as we continue moving, the text box won't appear and will be delayed. However, as soon as you let go of the analog stick and stop moving, all 3 requirements are met and the text box will appear. So, in order to keep the text storage, we need to be moving constantly. I should note that this method for getting the text box storage was discovered by Spaghetti. Now, how exactly does delaying the text box help us? Well, there are a few benefits. The first thing we can get is more height. Let's look at the text storage Capri-Dog used in the level Al's Toy Barn to see how he gained extra height. First, he went and defeated the boss in the level, making sure to get text storage when he picked up the token. He then ran to another part of the level, making sure to never let go of the analog stick. He ultimately runs to this table where a character called Ham is, and this is one of the characters Buzz can interact with. So Capri-Dog walks up to Ham to start talking to him, and this makes a text box appear for that character. But since this also forces Buzz to stop moving, the stored or delayed text box also appears. So now we have two text boxes on the screen. The dialogue text box between Ham and Buzz, and the delayed token grabbing text. Now, during this we can of course not move, because both of these text boxes take the control away from the player. If you press B, the dialogue with Ham will end, but the original stored text box will remain, since it requires you to choose one of the options on screen, and you can't quit out of that text box with B. But by pressing B earlier to get rid of the dialogue text box, the game also gives control back to the player. So now we can walk around with the stored text box on screen. As a side note, this will make the camera start behaving very strangely, and it will spin around Buzz, and Buzz's movement becomes somewhat limited. I believe this is because when this text box appears, Buzz normally spins until he is facing the camera. But since we have control, the camera is trying to go behind Buzz. So they are stuck in a loop where the camera is constantly trying to get to Buzz's back, but Buzz is constantly trying to face the camera. Despite the limited movement, however, you can still move around once you get used to it. Now, remember, you have two options on the text box: keep on playing or exit level. If you press exit level, Buzz will start an animation to end the level, where he pulls out his wings and flies straight up into the air. Now remember, normally after collecting a token you shouldn't have any control over Buzz, so Buzz should always just fly straight up into the air. But by doing the text storage, we can press exit level and keep controlling Buzz to some extent during the level exit flying animation. So by pressing exit level and then jumping and maneuvering Buzz to the right direction while the flying animation plays out, Capri-Dog was able to make Buzz reach much higher than his normal double jump and land on this token on the top of these boxes just before the level actually ends. Now, during the making of this video, I decided to learn the speedrun again. So I did learn to do this trick, and I want to note here just how incredibly fun and fulfilling it is. It's pretty long and has many different parts that just feel so good to puzzle together. You have to defeat the boss, learn where the token spawns, learn to time your jump just right to get the text storage, and run to the other side of the level, all while never releasing the analog stick. You then have to talk to Ham and press B, and then the camera becomes very wonky, so learning those controls is very challenging but also very fun. And then finally you need very precise and solid jump timing to be able to reach the final token during the level exit animation. This trick is just so diverse and fun that although it is a run-ender if it fails, it is still probably one of the most satisfying tricks I have ever learned during my time speedrunning. And also hats off to Lance, who puzzled all this together after Spaghetti found the method to get the text storage. Now, Capri-Dog would use one more text storage trick in his run, this time in the Tarmac Trouble level. And in this iteration, height was not the primary goal, but rather displacement. Normally, 2 tokens would be collected in Tarmac Trouble. The first one was the race token. The race makes you traverse this maze-like path without touching any of the green goo. If you ever touch the green edges, the race ends and you have to start all over again. Normally, after finishing the race, the player would move on to this corner of the level to collect the puzzle token as well. However, when CapriDog played the level, he would first go to the other corner of the level to the mini-boss, then defeat him and make sure to get text storage. He would then run towards the race, and once he was there, he would talk to Slinky Dog to start the race. As soon as you talk to Slinky Dog, a dialogue text box appears, and also the stored text box. So, just like before, we have two text boxes on the screen. Now, in the previous trick, we pressed B to end the dialogue text box. But this time we will press A on the Keep on Playing option on the stored text box. Doing this lets the player gain control again, despite the fact that the dialogue box with Slinky Dog is still on the screen. The race won't start until you actually end the dialogue box with Slinky Dog, so CapriDog was able to run right across the green goo to traverse to the end of the race. There he would press B to close the dialogue box to officially start the race. And as soon as the race starts, the token spawns, so Buzz can collect it right away without having to do the race at all. CapriDog would then continue on like normal to collect the puzzle token, so even though this doesn't really save a lot of time overall in this level, we collect 3 tokens instead of the usual 2, meaning we can skip a token in another level, saving time there. One more trick that CapriDog would also include was a new clip through the floor in the level Andy's house. Normally, players needed to go down the stairs to the basement and platform their way towards the token found in the upper corner of the basement. But CapriDog could simply go behind this door and clip through the floor to go straight to the token. This clip was previously only thought to be possible on emulator, but turned out to be possible on both versions. This clip is, however, very easy on emulator, but a lot more finicky on console. Only 6 days after CapriDog's last record, another player would claim the next world record. That player was Beast Assassin 67. He would set 3 world records in 3 consecutive days. A 29:08 and a 28:48, before ending with a 28:16 on the 28th of September 2021. Beast Assassin would add one more strat into the run, the Airport Infiltration YOLO strat. In the level Airport Infiltration, there are 3 tokens to be collected. The race token, which requires you to collect 5 collectibles, or dumbbells to be exact, within a designated time frame. The puzzle token, which is less of a puzzle and more of a platforming token, since this one is located at the top of this vertical airplane. And the mini-boss token, which is not really important for the YOLO strat. Okay, so normally players would first do the race token by talking to the character Rocky Gibraltar to start the race, and then going this route to collect all the dumbbells before returning to Rocky to collect the token. They would then proceed to enter the vertical airplane climbing section of the level to climb on top of the airplane and collect both the token at the top and also one more collectible required to get a power-up later on in the stage. Well, as you can see, doing this route requires the player to go through this tunnel 4 times, but as speedrunners we don't want to cover the same ground many times, and optimally you would want to do this path only twice, and that's precisely what the YOLO strat is. You start the race, then you collect the dumbbells, along with climbing to the top of the airplane to get the token and the last collectible on the way down. And then you return to Rocky, all before the race timer runs out. Now, I cannot understate just how tight and impressive this strat is. With absolutely perfect movement when collecting the dumbbells, and more importantly scaling the airplane, you can just barely make it back before the timer runs out. If you don't make it in time, the clock runs out and you have to start the race again. Doing the YOLO strat on console really is only for those who have speedrun this game for some time and have perfected their movement. Now, Cabri Dog would not go down without a fight and would manage to set one more world record. This time a blistering 27:37 on the 1st of October 2021. This was an absolutely amazing run, which in Cabri Dog's own words didn't have any mistakes. And it didn't. The only thing that could be done better would be movement, since Cabri Dog nailed all the tricks first try. For how good this run was, it feels like it should have stood for a long time. But that's not how it played out, because only 2 days later, on the 3rd of October 2021, Beast Assassin would just barely improve the time with a 1 second improvement, a 27:36. And although Beast Assassin would take a short break, he was not done yet. He wanted a 26. So, in the summer of 2022, he got to work and he first got a 27:12 on the 5th of July. For this run, he would add one last trick, the Tarmac Trouble double text storage. Remember how in Tarmac Trouble we used the text storage to talk to Slinky to skip the race? Well, after skipping the race we have lost text storage, but we can regain it when we collect the race token. If you have the Rocket Boots Powerup unlocked, you can get the Rocket Boots that are located just outside the race area and boost yourself into the token. Collecting the token with the Rocket Boots on will result in text storage, since the game can't stop your movement while being boosted by the boots. You can then proceed to the last token in the level, the puzzle token. Normally, you have to turn these lights on by pressing these switches in order to get the token. This token is, however, always loaded into the level. It's just positioned high in the air, and normally once you finish the puzzle, the token is lowered to the ground so you can collect it. Using text storage, we can skip the puzzle by positioning ourselves right under the token and then stopping so that the text box appears. We can then press exit level, and just like in Al's toy barn, we can use the text storage to achieve more height. When we exit the level, Buzz will do his level exit flying animation and fly right up into the token before the level ends. Beast Assassin would keep doing runs, and on the 13th of July he would get a 27 flat. And then finally on the 28th of July 2022, he would achieve his goal with a 26:43, and that's where the world record stands today. Now, Beast Assassin did tell me that when he got this last run, he considered it the best speedrun he had ever done. So let's just take a moment to appreciate this silent but very moving reaction to his run.
Did it, dude.
Now, despite the fact that console runs are somewhat rare in the Toy Story 2 speedrunning community, I believe this is most definitely not the end of Toy Story 2 N64 console speedrunning. There are several minor tricks that have yet to be implemented into the console runs, which are used in the emulated runs. These include the tire jump in Andy's neighborhood, double text storage in Elevator Hop, and the table lag jump in Penthouse. These are all relatively small time saves, but when you add all these together and the fact that the current world record lost around 20 seconds to missing collecting a mouse in Elevator Hop, a low 26 is definitely possible, and maybe even a 25. But those are probably speculations for another day. I should add though that even though these strats are used in the emulated world record, they are considerably more difficult on console because of lag. So adding these tricks into the run is always going to be more difficult on console than on emulator. The previously mentioned runner and scientist for Toy Story 2, Lance, also told me about something promising called the Void. The Void is an out-of-bounds glitch where the level geometry loops when falling while out of bounds for long enough, and strange things start to happen. This glitch is apparently somewhat complicated and is currently being investigated. Currently, the N64 version is the only one that cannot access the Void without cheats, but if any practical implications were to be found, it would break the game considerably. So, who knows what the future of Toy Story 2 any% console runs has to offer. So, what are my thoughts on this game? Well, like I mentioned earlier, during the making of this video, I actually decided to relearn the speedrun, since my 42:01 is frankly a pretty bad time. I wanted to get a sub 40 run and decided my goal would be to bop at least one person on the leaderboard, which meant I needed a sub 39:35. After a fair bit of practicing and a little bit of grind, I'm happy to announce that I have improved my PB and I now have a 38:55. Now, my experience relearning the game was a very fun one. I really enjoyed the learning process, and actually I enjoyed it a lot more than I did 2 years ago. I don't know if that says something about my development as a speedrunner, but at least I'm happy I revisited the game. I also think the new text storage tricks really make the run a lot more interesting. Despite feeling a bit slippery and finicky sometimes, the movement still feels great and it's challenging and fulfilling when done right. And it makes for a good speed game. I was playing on console, so the lag was a real issue, and unfortunately the lag does eat a lot of A presses. So when you want to jump off an edge, Buzz will sometimes simply run off without jumping, and you lose a bunch of time. But then again, console definitely feels more authentic to me, so I just look at it as another challenge. And eventually I did start learning where these laggy spots are and how to handle them. Also, Beast Assassin developed a lag reduction strat for one of the bosses, so who knows, as the console version gets more optimized, we might start seeing more lag reduction strats developed to save some frames. It is truly unfortunate though how difficult it can be to practice on console. The lag makes it so different to play on emulator compared to console that it is virtually impossible to practice on emulator if you intend to play on console. Most of the community plays on emulator, so using save states to practice is very easy for them, but if people want to run on console, this community could really benefit from a practice ROM so people can make save states on console. I believe having a practice ROM could really elevate the console speedrunning community for this game. I also want to mention that there are of course a lot of other small speed or movement strats used all over the run that I did not cover in this video. So if you are interested in knowing more, feel free to join the speedrunning Discord, which I will link in the description. or give some of these runners a follow on Twitch or YouTube. I don't really have much more to say about this game. It's just a very solid movement-based speed game that I would definitely recommend to anyone looking for a game to speedrun. I want to add a special thanks to Lance, who was patient enough to answer all my questions about Toy Story 2 speedrunning. Also, special thanks to Mooks, Beast Assassin, Cabri Dog, Spaghetti, Thermal Square, Andet, and Solarson. And as always, thank you so much for watching. If you would like to see more obscure N64 speedrunning content, feel free to subscribe. I intend to cover every N64 game I have run in similar videos. The next game I will cover is Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. That game is so broken and there is so much to say I might need to split that one into a few parts. But we'll see. I did already make a video about the glitches in that game, so if you are interested in knowing more about the glitches, I'll put a link in the video here. Again, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next video.